Every summer, it's the same story. You plant your corn, you water it, you fertilize it, and by August, you're standing there looking at stalks that barely reach your chest. The ears are small, half of them didn't fill out, and you're left wondering what went wrong. I know that feeling because I lived it for close to 20 years. But here's the thing that changed everything for me. About a mile down the road from my place, my Amish neighbor Daniel grows corn every single year. No bags of fertilizer, no chemical anything. And his stalks tower over mine by 2, sometimes 3 feet. Thick, dark green, loaded with full, heavy ears. I finally got up the nerve to ask him what he was doing differently, and what he told me was so simple it almost didn't make sense. He said, "You're feeding the plant, I'm feeding the soil. That's the difference." That one sentence completely changed how I grow corn. And today I'm going to show you exactly how the Amish do it. We're going to cover everything from how they build their soil months before a single seed goes in the ground, to the planting layout that most American gardeners have never tried, to the timing method that has nothing to do with what the calendar says. And stick around to the end, because I'm going to share a simple Amish compost tea recipe that I started using 3 years ago, and honestly, I can't believe the difference it made in my ears. Let me start with the foundation of this whole approach, because if you get this right, everything else falls into place. And if you skip it, nothing else I'm about to share will matter nearly as much. It's the soil. Now, I know you've heard that before. Everyone says soil matters, but here's where the Amish approach is different from what most of us were taught. Most of us treat soil like a container. We put our seeds in, we add some fertilizer to give them a boost, and we hope for the best. The Amish don't think about it that way at all. They treat the soil like a living system. Daniel once told me that his grandfather used to say the corn is only as tall as the soil is deep and rich. And when I finally understood what that meant in practice, it changed everything. Here's what the Amish do, and here's what I started doing once I learned it. In the fall, the season before you plan to grow corn, you start building your bed. You spread a layer of aged manure, and I want to be clear about the word aged. This is manure that has been composted and broken down for at least 6 months, ideally a year. Fresh manure will burn your plants. It's too hot, too much nitrogen all at once. Aged manure is dark, crumbly, and it smells like earth, not like a barn. You spread that aged manure about 4 to 6 inches deep over your corn bed. Then you layer on another 4 to 6 inches of good compost. Leaf, mold, kitchen scraps that have broken down, whatever you've been building in your pile, you're aiming for a combined layer of 8 to 12 inches of this rich composted organic material on top of your existing soil. Then you let it sit through the winter. The freeze and thaw cycles break it down further. The worms move through it. The microbial life in the soil starts integrating all of that organic matter. By spring, when you dig your hands into that bed, it should be dark, almost black. It should crumble in your fingers. It should smell sweet and earthy. That's living soil. That's what the Amish have been building on their farms for generations, layer by layer, year after year. Now, I want to be straight with you. If you haven't been doing this, your first year won't be the same as someone who's been building their soil for a decade. But even in the first season, the difference is dramatic. My first year doing this, my corn was noticeably taller and the ears were fuller than anything I'd grown with store-bought fertilizer. And it just gets better every year as the soil life compounds. If you don't have access to aged manure from a local farm, and I know not everyone does, you can use bagged composted manure from your garden center. Look for composted cow manure or composted chicken manure. It's not quite the same as what Daniel uses straight from his farm, but it works. The key is the depth and the richness of that organic layer. Don't skimp on it. Corn is one of the heaviest feeders in the garden, and the Amish know that if you want tall corn, you have to give it something deep and rich to grow in. Now, here's where the Amish approach takes a turn from what most of us were taught. When do you actually plant? If you're like I was, you probably go by the calendar, you look up your last frost date, you count forward a couple of weeks, and you put your seeds in the ground. That's what the seed packet says, and that's what I did for years. But Daniel never looked at a calendar for planting corn. He looked at the soil. The Amish have a principle that I think is one of the smartest things I've ever learned about gardening. They don't plant by the date. They plant by the soil temperature. Corn seed needs warm soil to germinate properly. If you put it in cold, wet ground, it just sits there. It rots, or it germinates so slowly that it comes up weak. What you want is soil that has reached 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit at about 2 inches deep. That's the sweet spot. Now, how do you check that? You can buy a simple soil thermometer for a few dollars at any garden center. Push it down about 2 inches into your bed first thing in the morning, because that's when the soil's coolest. If it reads 60 degrees or above consistently for 3 or 4 mornings in a row, you're ready to plant. In most areas, zones 5 through 8, this usually happens about 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost date, but the actual date varies every single year depending on the spring you're having. Some years it's early May, some years it's late May. The calendar can't tell you that, but the soil can. Daniel used to say the soil will tell you when it's ready. You just have to listen, and he was right. For folks up in zones 3 and 4, your window is shorter, and that soil takes longer to warm up. Choose an early maturing variety, something in the 70 to 85 day range, and be patient. Don't rush it into cold ground. You'll lose more time recovering from a bad start than you would by waiting an extra week. For those of you in zones 8 and 9, you got the opposite situation. Your soil warms up early, and you can often get 2 succession plantings in. Just make sure your second planting still has enough days of warm weather to mature before fall. This next step is the one that made the single biggest visible difference in my corn, and it's the one that most American gardeners have never tried. It's how you arrange your planting. Most of us were taught to plant corn in long rows, 1 row, 2 rows, maybe 3 if you've got the space. That's how we see it in the big commercial fields, and that's how the seed packet diagrams show it. But the Amish plant corn in blocks, and when you understand why, you'll never go back to rows. Here's the thing about corn that a lot of gardeners don't realize. Corn is wind pollinated. It doesn't use bees. It doesn't use butterflies. The tassels at the very top of the stalk release pollen, and that pollen has to land on the silk of the ears below. Every single silk strand is connected to one kernel. If a silk strand doesn't get pollinated, that kernel doesn't develop. That's why you get ears with missing kernels and bare patches. It's not a disease. It's not a pest. It's incomplete pollination. And when you plant in long, narrow rows, the wind carries most of that pollen right past your corn and off into the yard. You lose it. When you plant in a block at least 4 rows wide by 4 rows deep, the pollen falls into the block. The plants catch each other's pollen. The ears fill out completely top to bottom. Every kernel developed. Daniel's corn beds are always square or nearly square, never long and narrow, and his ears are full every single time. Here's the layout. Space your rows about 30 inches apart. Within each row, plant your seeds 8 to 12 inches apart. 8 inches gives you a tighter canopy that shades out weeds and holds moisture, but it works best in that deeply composted soil we talked about because the plants won't be competing for nutrients. 12 inches gives each plant a little more room and works better if your soil is still in the early stages of building up. A 4x4 block is your minimum, but bigger is better. A 6x6 or 8x8 block is even more effective for pollination. If you only have room for a small bed, go 4x4 and you'll still see a dramatic improvement over 2 long rows. I remember the first year I switched from rows to a block. I couldn't believe the ears. Every one was full. No bare patches, no gaps. It was the same seed. I'd been planting for years, the same garden, just a different layout. That's when I really started paying attention to everything Daniel was doing. Now, what I'm showing you today is just one piece of a much bigger picture. The Amish don't do anything in isolation. Every technique connects to a whole system, and that system is what makes the difference between a garden that struggles and a garden that practically takes care of itself. I spent years learning how it all fits together. And I've put everything into a step-by-step guide called the 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. It's got the complete 5 defense layers, the companion planting charts, the 4-bed crop rotation, all of it laid out day by day so you're never guessing what to do next. If you want to go deeper than what we can cover in one video, there are 2 easy ways to get it. You can click the link right down there in the description below this video, or if you're watching this on your TV or your computer, just grab your phone, open up the camera, and point it at the QR code on screen right now. It'll take you straight to the guide. No searching, no typing anything in. All right, let's keep going. Building the soil and planting in blocks gives your corn an incredible foundation population, but corn is a hungry crop, and what you do during the growing season matters just as much as what you did before planting. About 4 to 6 weeks after your corn emerges, when the stalks are roughly knee-high, the plant enters its most rapid growth phase. This is when it's pulling nitrogen out of the soil faster than almost any other time in its life. And this is where most conventional gardeners reach for the bag of synthetic fertilizer. I did the same thing for years. I'd scatter some 10-10-10 around the base of my stalks and call it good. But Daniel showed me something different. The Amish side dress their corn with more of that aged composted manure. Side dressing just means adding fertilizer alongside the plants during the growing season, not before planting, but while the crop is actively growing. Here's exactly how to do it. When your corn reaches knee height, take your composted manure and create a ring around each stalk, about 6 inches out from the base. You don't want it touching the stalk directly. Spread it about 2 inches thick in that ring, then gently work it into the top inch of soil with your fingers or a hand cultivator. Then water it in well. Now here's why this works differently than synthetic fertilizer, and this is the part that really clicked for me when Daniel explained it. When you apply synthetic fertilizer, it hits the soil like a sugar rush. The plant gets a big spike of available nitrogen, uses what it can, and the rest either washes away with the next rain or burns off. It's fast, but it's gone fast. Composted manure releases its nitrogen slowly over weeks. The microbial life in your soil breaks it down gradually, feeding the plant at a steady, consistent rate right through that critical growth period. The plant doesn't get a spike and a crash. It gets a steady, sustained supply of exactly what it needs. That's why Amish corn doesn't just grow tall in a burst and then stall out. It keeps growing steadily right up until it tassels. If your soil is already deeply composted from the fall preparation we talked about earlier, this side dressing is like adding a second gear. The plant has that deep, rich foundation below, and now it has a fresh supply of slow-release nutrients feeding it from the sides. It's a system, not a single trick, and that's the Amish approach in a nutshell. Everything works together. Building on that principle, there's one more practice I picked up from Daniel that I think is one of the most underrated things a gardener can do. He calls it the morning walk. Every single morning, Daniel walks through his corn. Not to do anything specific, not to spray, not to pull weeds, though he might pull one if he sees it. He walks through to observe. He looks at the color of the leaves. He checks whether the lower leaves are yellowing, which tells him the soil nitrogen is running low. He looks at how the stalks are spacing themselves, whether they're leaning, whether the tassels are emerging evenly. He feels the soil with his hands to check moisture. It takes him about 10 minutes. I started doing this myself about 5 years ago, and I want to be honest with you, it felt silly at first. I thought, what am I going to see that I can't see from the porch? But within a week, I understood. When you walk through your corn every morning, you catch things early. You notice a color change in the leaves 3 days before it becomes a real problem. You spot a pest issue when there are 5 beetles, not 500. You feel the soil drying out before the plants start to wilt. It's the difference between reacting to problems and preventing them, and that's the Amish philosophy in one sentence. Don't fight problems. See them coming and adjust before they ever take hold. Your corn will tell you what it needs if you're paying attention. Now let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years. Places where the conventional approach and the Amish approach handle things differently. I did most of these things the conventional way for a long time, so there's no judgment here, just some observations that might help you get better results. The first pattern is the fertilizer approach. Most of us reach for the bag of synthetic fertilizer because it's convenient and it works fast, and it does work, but the Amish approach adds a layer that synthetic fertilizer can't match. Composted manure doesn't just feed the plant, it feeds the soil biology. It adds organic matter that holds moisture. It creates a living system in the ground that sustains the plant all season long, not just for the 2 weeks after you apply the granules. So instead of just feeding the corn, you're building a soil that feeds the corn for you. The second pattern is the planting layout. Long rows are what we've always seen, and they work fine for commercial operations with mechanical harvesters. But for a home garden, block planting is simply more effective for pollination. The Amish figured this out through generations of observation, and the science of vine pollination confirms exactly why it works. You don't have to tear out your whole garden. Just try one block this year and compare your ear fill to your rows. I think you'll see the difference immediately. The third pattern is timing. Planting by the calendar feels safe because it gives you a specific date, but the soil doesn't care what the calendar says. A cold, wet spring means cold soil, and cold soil means poor germination no matter what date it is. The Amish invest a few minutes with a soil thermometer and plant when the ground is actually ready. It's a small shift that makes a big difference in how your corn starts out, and a strong start sets up everything that follows. The fourth pattern is the observation habit. Most of us check on our garden when we have time, maybe a couple of times a week. The Amish walk their crops every single day, not because they have more time than we do. They're some of the busiest people I've ever met. They do it because 10 minutes of observation prevents hours of crisis management later. Catching a problem early is always easier than fixing it after it's taken hold. The fifth pattern is the long-term thinking. Conventional gardening tends to be season by season. You buy your inputs, you grow your crop, you start over next year. The Amish think in terms of building something over years. Every season of composting, every rotation, every cover crop is an investment in the next 5 years of growing. That compounding effect is why Daniel's soil looks the way it does after decades of this practice. Your first year will be good, your third year will be noticeably better, and by year 5 you'll have soil that almost grows corn by itself. Now here's the bonus I teased at the beginning. This is something I picked up from Daniel about 3 years ago that I wasn't expecting to make much of a difference, but it genuinely did. It's a simple compost tea that he uses as a foliar feed on his corn during that rapid growth phase. Here's exactly how to make it. Take a 5-gallon bucket and fill it about 1/3 full with finished compost, good dark earthy compost. Fill the rest of the bucket with water, not tap water if you can avoid it because the chlorine can kill the beneficial microbes. Rainwater is ideal, or you can fill a bucket with tap water and let it sit uncovered for 24 hours to let the chlorine dissipate. Stir that mixture a few times a day and let it steep for about 3 days. After 3 days, strain out the solids through an old burlap sack or a piece of window screen. What you're left with is a dark, rich tea that's loaded with beneficial microorganisms and water-soluble nutrients. Take that tea and pour it into a watering can or a simple pump sprayer. Apply it directly to the leaves and the base of your corn stalks in the early morning before the sun gets strong. Do this once every 2 weeks during that active growth phase. What you're doing is giving the plant a direct boost of microbial life and trace nutrients right through the leaves, supplementing what the roots are pulling from the soil. I started doing this about 3 years ago, and the first thing I noticed was the color of the leaves. Deeper green almost immediately. The ears that season were the biggest I'd ever grown. It seems almost too simple to make a difference, but when you understand that you're essentially delivering a concentrated dose of soil biology directly to the plant, it makes perfect sense. Give it a try. I think you'll be surprised. Now, everything I've shared with you today is a real practical system you can start using this season, but it's still just one piece of a much bigger picture. If you want the complete framework, the full 5 defense layers, the 4-bed rotation plan that keeps your soil building year after year, and the companion planting field guide that shows you exactly what to grow next to what, then I'd encourage you to grab a copy of the 30-day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. It's everything I've learned from my Amish neighbors over 3 decades laid out in a simple day-by-day plan. Click the link in the description right below this video. Just scroll down a little and you'll see it. Or if you're watching on a television or computer screen, take out your phone, open up your camera like you're going to take a picture, and hold it up to the QR code on screen right now. A little link will pop up at the top of your phone. Just tap that and it'll take you right to the guide. I think it's the best investment you can make in your garden this year. That's what I've learned from my Amish neighbors about growing tall, healthy corn without a single bag of chemical fertilizer. If any of this changed how you think about your garden, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you've got old wisdom that's been passed down in your family, share it. That's how we all get better. Thanks for spending time with me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Say.